Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Animation Appreciation Podcast. I'm your host, Liliana Stargazer, and today we'll be covering Disney's Up. This movie is one I almost decided against covering. It came out just after the first anniversary of my father's death. My mother and I ended up crying in theaters when we went to see it, and to this day, my heart breaks at thanks for the adventure, now go have a new one. Let's start this before I change my mind, as I've only seen this movie once or twice since, now about 3 times. I am actually dedicating this episode to my deceased father and my living mother. I hope you both appreciate this. The facial expressions on Charles Muntz and the child Carl is so well done. The fact that the announcer's voice is in Carl's head as well as in the movie theater is actually a cute way to let us see how young Carl sees himself. The fact that the house he finds Ellie in is actually the one he ends up buying her is cute and a delightful touch. This movie is one example of how movies used to do hair by having them in groups. You can actually see these groups in Ellie's and Carl's hair, and that's actually how they animated it up until almost Tangled and The Incredibles. You can see them in almost clumpy look to them. Also, the little 4 to 5 minute story is the saddest and cutest thing I've ever seen, and a perfect example of show don't tell. Pixar is known for their shorts like this because good animation tells a story without words. It uses small things like facial expressions and gestures. This is actually well known, especially if you've seen the movie Wall-E. Up until the humans are involved, no words are spoken. Even technically speaking, the robots don't speak. And if you hear any strange noises in the background, there is a storm brewing. I am fine. The Stark change from their bright house to the sterile doctor's office to let us know something terrible has happened. I also enjoy how Carl's face shows he thinks he ruined all her hard work on the mailbox, while her facial expression shows that she was considering it and actually really liked it and added her own handprint. The heartbreak of wanting a child and can't have one, the music reinforcing this. I don't want kids. And that scene made me feel her pain. Using all of his ties to show how time passes is a clever little way to keep us knowing that she's been there every day. The storytelling here is so well done, it has broken millions of hearts without even one word being spoken. The slow descent down the stairs after the fast paced story before it shows how unexciting and lonely his life has become, and how he feels he's just existing instead of actually living. To show all his daily little activities that they did together, showing her absence in all those moments that we have seen her present for, so that we can feel her death just as he does. Across from Carl's house is a sushi, pronto, and laser tan, as well as game and go. What is laser tan? Anyway, the way the lighting was bright and vibrant when Ellie was alive to dark and barely lit when she died lets us know how his emotions are actually at that moment. The simple detail of the man's tag sticking up when he comes to get Carl, as opposed to his friend who has his tag sticking down. The way the animators put sunlight going through the balloons and the kaleidoscope effect it had around them. Also, we see the Pixar ball Luxo in the child's room. Again, someone made the setting for the glass and window materials. Those are actually quite difficult, and I have only managed to achieve it by accident when I was working. Carl flies over a billboard for South America. The way one or two balloons drift behind the bunch every so often means somebody sat down and went, these balloons should fall behind. The dust particles that come up from the vents. Someone had to sit there, design how that was going to look, and animate them. The atmospheric effect of the fog and how it reacts to Kevin. Someone had to program that in by default to fog, and everything else ignores everything and everyone. The only way anything can react to anything is if you sit there and tell it not just to react, what to react to, how much to react, and how turbulent. And that's just a sample. I know I'm missing some settings in there, but there is a ton of things that go into just the little fact, the little wisps of the fog followed Kevin for a second. Also, by default in 3D animation, there is no such thing as collision. All of that has to be programmed in. And when I said everything, I meant down to lightings, materials, the effects on those. Cloth itself has to actually be edited because the default cloth engine with its default settings are just wonky. It took me about 30 minutes to put a blanket on a bed in a game. because I didn't like how it was falling. I have genuinely messed with these settings, and they are all complicated and difficult and time consuming and always impressive when they're pulled off correctly. The fact that the dogs actually leave paw prints in the mud. The sound of rain on balloons. Someone had to sit down in a sound stage and find a way to replicate that sound. When he says, Phyllis isn't my mom, even the rain goes quiet for the emotional moment so that we can sit in the quiet. Just the simple differences between the model design for Charles Muntz and Carl, letting us know that Charles is still much older than Carl, even though they do both seem very elderly. That line, the boring stuff is the stuff I remember the most. That's actually very true. I remember the small, simple things that my departed loved ones did. Like one of my grandmothers would break out into song randomly. It was a running joke that the whole family could just break out in song. So someone threw a hat in the middle of the floor, as in the drop of a hat, and she sang first. Um, the father that passed away a year or so before this movie came out, he would always smile when I'd hug him, even when he didn't feel good. Sometimes one of my other grandmothers would just look at someone and you knew she was going to start and win that fight. Carl's model actually reminds me of one of my grandfathers, and he had so many small mannerisms I never forgot. Like if you ate your meal while you're watching TV too slow, he would turn it off. And just little things like that. And I remember the boring stuff like that more than anything else. And the fact this movie uses a child to tell us that so we can all realize it, just like Carl. The facial expressions Carl has, and even Russell has, as they both realize what they've just said and heard, take us both on the same journey with both of them at the same time they are. This is one of the points where I actually had to stop writing because I got too emotional. But anyway, Russell is no longer assisting him with his house after the loss of Kevin. He is there because he cares, but he is pointedly not helping. He's not attached to the house, not dragging. He's kind of just behind, keeping an eye on Carl. Also, the nails you can see driven into the wood of the floor. Somebody sat down, put nails in the floor, because by default, there are no nails, no texture, no anything. Also, someone had to build the materials for those nails. The depth people go to make movies like this is insane. Finally, Carl has a moment where he slows down enough to grieve. That moment is where he can finally move on. His expressions and the fact you can see the tears gathering when he looks at the album. The final line she left him, thanks for the adventure, now go have a new one, can and will make anyone who lost someone cry. The little cross my heart gesture he does as a callback to the beginning. He steers the house like she did as a child instead of the mechanism he was using to get to South America. The moment when he's holding up the tennis ball and we zoom in, you see little fuzzies on it. By default, balls in any 3D program are smooth as silk. Particularly, they're as smooth as glass and they are also matte gray. So the fact that someone had to sit down, give it its fuzzies, program in those little fuzzies is phenomenal. Mutz's little eye twitch when Russell is sliding along on the glass. Take a moment and admire the way that light shines through Russell's ear as whenever he is backlit. You can actually see little veins in it. Carl's past is represented by his house and his things, and it is slowing him down and stopping him from living. That is why it's so important that he left it at the falls and took the spirit of adventure back home so that he can finally live and stop just waiting to die. The music is slowed and changed, but the basics of it is the same to show Ellie's theme and their relationship. As even Alan Seawright and Jonathan Decker, both of Cinema Therapy, said, there are perfect movies out there, and this is one of them. Everything that seems to be a throwaway line is actually referenced later in the film. Thank you, Internet Dads, for suffering with me and crying with me. Normally, I would go into greater depth and double check my work and make sure I didn't miss anything, but I was barely able to get through this film without crying, so I am done reviewing it. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for going through this heartfelt journey with me. And always remember, if it's animated, down to even the fuzzies, someone did it on purpose. Thank you for listening.